Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop role-playing game news, interviews, reviews, stuff, and game design and stuff. And Teos and I and stuff. I'm Shawn Merwin here with Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos.
Hello, Shawn. I am doing what I always do after a loss.
Yeah.
You've got to wear your colors. My poor Duke
Yep.
team ran into some serious buzzsaw of defense from Houston, and I didn't want the season to end. I enjoyed it so much, but end it had to, and so it goes. I
Yeah.
thank everybody on the Discord who tried to console me. I'm slowly getting better. I'm following a 12-step process that involves liquefying basketballs and drinking them. It's working.
That's good. That's good. It did not stoop to the level of a basketball team losing, but I attended a funeral this weekend.
Oh, well.
Yeah. And it was particularly touching because it was the mother of one of my best friends from high school. And it's sort of where I grew up playing D&D at this
Yeah.
woman's house. Uh, and we got the strange looks from the kitchen going, what are you doing? But we also got brownies and cookies, right? And I sort of grew up. I learned to play D&D at this house.
Oh, wow.
And so it was good to see my friend again, and good to see his family. And hard to say goodbye to people
Sure.
that you love and memories and all those things. So there was a lot of reminiscing going on there for me specifically.
Oh, that's. I mean, it's hard, but it's also kind of beautiful. Like that's. Yeah.
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 So condolences, Joe. And it was good to see you under rough circumstances, but let's talk again soon. Also talking to us are our listeners, who send us questions via Patreon, Discord, and YouTube and Mastodon, Bluesky at our email address, which is masteringdnd@gmail.com. Sometimes they talk to us in real life. Sometimes we meet at conventions. Sometimes we just pretend that we have met people or do not remember if we did or not. But we have two folks here who I strongly believe are real and strongly believe that they did, in fact, reach out to us. First, random encounters via Bluesky, who has this question. I'm starting up 2 homebrew campaigns that play on alternate weeks. I thought it would be fun for them to happen at the same time and in the same place, like a city around a giant pit that leads down into danger. So group 1 will have a session, and group 2 will see the results the next week, and then group 2's action will be seen by group 1 the following week, etc. This is my first time trying something like this. What are some pitfalls I should keep an eye out for? Have you run anything like this before? Could this lower my weekly prep work or make it harder? Uh, I have had experience on both sides of this. I don't know if you have, Teos.
A little bit. A little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So I played in a campaign like this when I was in high school. So this was second edition AD&D. And it was very fun until it wasn't. So in this case, we were playing Undermountain. And so our group would go explore Undermountain.
Right.
We would finally have to come out. Lack of resources, whatever, rest. And then the next week, the other group would go in. And
Lovely.
we would see what they had done. And it was, we knew this was happening, and it was interesting and it was fun. And we'd like see this next room, and we knew there was treasure, but we couldn't get there because we were out. So we'd come back and it would be looted, and we'd be like, "Oh
yeah.
no, they got it." And so at one point, I wanted to see if we could figure out who this other group was. So I set up a trap where like this ink would dump on someone, and then it would be impossible, or you could detect it with magic. So they wouldn't know, but detect magic would tell us, and then we could go around the city or hang around the entrance and see if we could figure it out. And so sort of harmless, but so the next time we go in, there's like this deadly trap set for us. I was like, oh, okay. Oh, wait, this escalated quickly. Okay. I see how this is. So then it started going back and forth like that, right? It was just as much about stopping the other party as it was exploring.
Wow. Yeah.
Which was sort of fun, but then sort of not. And then at some point, the two groups came together, and we thought, oh, it'll be fun, and we'll play a bit further. No, it just turned into they didn't
Yeah.
trust us, and were trying to. It was that doing things that might get us killed, but not direct attacks.
Yeah.
Until finally, I got
Yeah.
sick of it. I was like, okay, we need to stop this, and they attacked my character and killed it. And that was the end of that.
So the
And
lesson is
so,
never take a stand.
right.
Yeah.
So it was fun, but there was that competition that got
Yeah.
unhealthy. Uh,
Yeah, so I'll just add that I had a very similar experience, though we didn't set out to do that kind of a campaign. But what happened was we were playing Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and we were in the spaceship. And if folks know, there's a thing around key cards with limited numbers and getting access to places, almost like a puzzle. And half the party was evil, and so it was one of those things where it just separated the group. We fractured. And the DM decided, well, I'll just run the two groups and it'll be so fun. Except some of us had some key cards, some had others. So the game itself stopped working. The module could not be really played. And then we just kept, like you said, getting in each other's way and causing trouble. Or you wanted payoff and you found another room with like smashed androids and no fun to be had. And so it was really like everybody got half the fun if you're even lucky, and actually a lot less. And eventually we fought each other in that and just. I don't think we actually killed each other. We retreated, but the DM was just like, I'm done. Starting over.
Yeah. And so when I ran something similar, it was a very similar situation, but out in an untamed wilderness.
Mm.
So rather than a dungeon, it was group would go out, explore certain locations, have encounters, pick up resources, etc. So it wasn't as linear as a dungeon, which was helpful. But I also didn't try to account for every single change that one group made. Sometimes I would run the exact same encounter for both groups. Sometimes I would say, you come up on this campsite and you see dead goblins, and right. And so there was this understanding, but I also didn't tell the groups that this was happening.
Oh, okay.
So until much later. So what I would do is sort of use one group as an NPC for another group, right? And make the changes when it made sense, when it inspired me. And I thought, okay, this story's cool to introduce this other group's actions. And I might, sort of twist what they did rather than have it be exactly right. So it worked great as a tool. It didn't work great as trying to have it be absolutely spot on, picture perfect of what either group did.
Yeah, and looking at this question, so one thing I would say is you want to speak to these problems we've identified, right? So one thing is making sure they're on the same team. So pick factions in this city that has a giant pit to explore down below, and they're on the same team, and make that really clear, right? And maybe there's a reason why they have two teams, like they are operating in secrecy, and they're two different sort of cells of a group that need to kind of maintain this separation. Maybe every now and then one of them might switch onto the other, but in general, they are operating in secret, but common purpose, right? And they like each other. They're trying to help each other. I think you want to address that issue of like, if you get to a place and it's already been handled, that's no fun. So maybe you're sharing information periodically, like leaving missives for each other. Last session, we took out the Minotaur cave. Don't worry about that guy. But we heard a clue that's really cool about this. So the other team's a boon, not a bane to each other, right? Like the groups are helping each other. And like missions would be carried out by a faction, right? The faction would organize and do things. There's plenty to do. There's no shortage of fun, no shortage of treasure. But what you do kind of maybe impacts, because maybe in clearing out the Minotaur, that has allowed the goblins to proliferate, and you've got to deal with that. And so with unknown impacts could be a fun place. What we do has an impact on the place down there and that you're exploring, and maybe even on the city above. And so these things become interesting to see what happens. And you see what we do impacts the game, and the other group will hear about that. Is kind of cool, right? That part could be really neat.
Yeah. And what you can do then is you can create encounters that lean into that. Oh, there's the Minotaur War, and we wiped them out, but two of them escaped. Well, you know where those two went, right? Directly into the path of the other group. And that adventure just became harder.
Yeah.
not only because there are two minotaurs among the goblins now, but those
Yeah.
minotaurs may have taken something, some knowledge, an actual physical thing out of their warren that will make
Yeah.
life harder for the other party. And then you can find ways to show those consequences to both groups and make it,
Yeah.
oh no, we didn't, we let them down by not doing this, or oh, we really helped them by giving them that information of
Yeah.
a minotaur with a wand of fireballs is running loose, so be ready.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Intel like that and causal bits. Yeah. We may have, tripped off a arcane ward that is going to
Yep.
impact somewhere. We don't know where, right? Be on the lookout. Yeah. That could be a lot of fun. Um, this also reminds me of sort of the concept of West March's play, which there's a classic blog out there where I forget the name of the person who developed this idea that's often been studied. He was playing third edition and he had a number of players and so many that he was like, well, what if whoever shows up, you go in and do stuff. And to facilitate that, what he did was the idea that you go out into this unexplored territory, explore a piece, and come back. And that was the key because you weren't just exploring the goblin cave for weeks on end, because then another group might show up. Or what do you do with the player that was in the caves, but now is outside the cave somehow wanting to explore with three people who aren't in the caves? Right. So everything was go out, explore a thing, come back, done. That's the session. Almost exclusively. Every now and then they'd come up with some reason why that didn't happen, but it was very, very rare. And so that allowed a feeling of like, I have done a thing, I can check it off the list, which would work really well in this kind of a situation, be able to like report what you did. Versus if you're just in a place for a very long time, well, then maybe the other group wants to go there too. And that creates sort of, like we talked about before, there's sort of sense that you're competing or, trotting on each other, that kind of thing.
So, very good question. The answer is it doesn't have to be more work and it can be less work, but it might be different work.
Yeah.
It might be
Yeah.
different work with that coordination.
Yeah, I think it really will, and you'll have to work to keep those storylines of the characters and groups separate, even though it's the same setting. And so that will be hard. I mean, even I have a lot of players for my Deadlands campaign, and even for that, not knowing exactly who will show up in any given week, I just have to have the irons in the fire, right? If this character shows up, I will activate that one because that pertains to them, and I've been looking for a way to highlight them. So I've always got that ready to go, right?
Sure. And our second question this week comes from Mike Chaos via YouTube. Shawn and Teos, any thoughts on how you would convert 4E adventures to 5E where the monsters don't have direct alternatives in the newer edition?
I
Short
like
answer.
your answer.
My short answer, one sentence: buy Forge of Foes and subscribe to Teos's content, making any monster that you need to simply and quickly.
That's very kind. So yeah, 4E has monsters that are very different, right, John? Like we know this because we worked on them. They tend to have these big, colorful expressions of what they do, and those tend to be very unique and often tied to the story. And now I did this, like I would write like an Ashes of Athos inspired Dark Sun Dungeon Magazine article, and I would create members of this faction, and they would have things that where their attacks, their powers are also full of that kind of story idea. But that part is not too terrible. And so what I would do is I would take a monster that you feel is a stand-in, right? Something from 5th edition that you go like, well, that's kind of like this, right? If I've got a wizard, so I'm going to start with a mage. And then I'm going to say, well, what does that other one do that this one doesn't, that matters, right? That tells its story. And you could maybe color it, right? So you could say, and the fireball is a frostball, right? Or you could actually swap it out. And you can keep the damage pretty close to the same. You can look at my blog for sort of damage values and things like that. But you can just do some swaps like that to where you're carrying that story forward. 4th edition is full of things that are like push, pull, slide, knocking prone. What's that?
Marking.
Yeah, marking. applying sort of slightly different conditions than what 5th edition does. So you probably don't want to do too much of that, but you might every now and then dip into those pieces, but slide it down, tamp it down a bit, because it's not the style of the edition to have that much. And so if the monsters are doing lots of that, but the players aren't, it would be a little off. But otherwise, yeah, I think I would just choose a stable basis, something that can be a stand-in, and then just few modifications to get that color in. That's going to make it feel right.
Yeah, I agree. And go back to my original buy Forge of Foes and subscribe to Teos' content.
Yeah, and Forge of Foes does have a lot of monster powers, which make it very easy to kind of swap something in, and you can look what we did there. It's also got a section on monster rolls, so like what if you wanted to make it more of a defender, more of a controller, then you can get inspired by the monster roll powers that exist in Forge of Foes. Thanks, Shawn.
No problem. That was an honest answer. And speaking of honest answers, we are going to now jump into our news and commentary section, starting with Chris Perkins, who you may have heard of as a designer on D&D for 28 years, has retired, or has decided to retire from Wizards of the Coast. On the 4th of April, Chris wrote on Bluesky, "Today I retire from Wizards of the Coast after 28 years. With D&D's 50th anniversary wrapping up and the revised rulebooks doing gangbusters, this is the perfect fairy tale ending for me. I can't wait to enjoy D&D purely as a fan again, knowing the game is in good hands. See you in the Feywild." And I mean, I can only speak for myself, but it was an absolute pleasure and an honor to get to work with Chris on a couple of projects. Like a complimentary email or a note from Chris on something you worked on was like the highlight of my professional month. I would just like bask in the glow of, hey, good work.
Yeah.
So, and for me, Chris was a great person to be at the front of the D&D team when we had the switch from D&D and role-playing games being all about the books or the magazines to more about the personalities and more about the marketing side of the D&D team, because he did a great job running games, streams. He did a great job of giving interviews. He did a great job of discussing the game for YouTube videos. But you also always knew that wasn't why he was there.
Right.
He was there to make a great game and make fun for people. And so you got to see, the public side, but it always took a backseat to the work that he sat there at his desk and did for the good of the game. So it was a win all around.
Yeah, that devotion he had was remarkable, right? I mean, the stories that have been told, like how he went off and just on a weekend essentially writes the Curse of Strahd adventure, or during the D&D Next time period where he just goes off to his house and stays up doing the spreadsheet of all the monsters and what their stats should probably be, right? Just decides to do that, right? He's that guy on a team that just will do that hard work. And like you said, when he's in front of the camera, he's very good at it, but it's not a job he relishes. I mean, we all get some ego boost, right? But he didn't love it. And I remember the first time that I met him, it was at a PAX West convention, and he was dressed as a Mad Hatter after an Ack Inc. game. And, I said hi to him and, what fun this must be. And he said something like, "Oh, I hate it. It's terrifying." And I was surprised because I hadn't really noticed. But once he said that, I started looking at these various public appearances he does, all these Ack Inc. games and so on he'd run. And yeah, you can see that he's doing it sort of in spite of that, which is amazing, right? But he was so very good at it. Like if you watch him run those games, it's such fun, and he showcases a lot of great DM skills for everybody to see, which is fantastic. And under all of it is that he's got one of the most remarkable careers in tabletop role-playing games, right? From 1988, when he writes an article in Dungeon Magazine number 11, and then continues to just be, a kid writing in articles, right? Doing what we did and what we tried to do more successfully, much more successfully.
Yeah.
And then he joins Wizards of the Coast in the late 90s. He becomes an editor of Dungeon Magazine, then the editor-in-chief. He works in all kinds of RPGs, Star Wars Saga and 3E and story manager for 4E. Writes the 4E blog, The Dungeon Master Experience, which was a fantastic work, very influential to a lot of DMs in that era. Yep. He DMs and pioneers the first D&D streams. The first ones are audio, right, with Penny Arcade and Robot Chicken. Acquisitions Incorporated. I mean, just sort of at the forefront of what became a huge, important part of D&D itself and all role-playing games through streaming. Serving as the senior story designer during 5e, then game architect, and then very interestingly in October, the short-lived position of creative director, a role intended to allow D&D to have worlds expressed in different forms of entertainment. And I suspect that this was Chris trying to still sort of serve D&D despite, being ready to retire quite some time ago. I mean, he was a person that I would always hear rumors about retirement many years ago starting, right? And I think he willed himself forward and probably here was willing to help himself forward again and eventually said, it's time. And I did exchange some words with him before the show. And he said, I really just want to rest right now. I don't want to be in front of cameras. I don't want, it really is about Chris is tired. He's gonna take a long rest.
Yes. And not just the 24-hour version.
Right.
And
the AD&D version.
Yes, exactly. That longevity, especially, in any corporate setting, is remarkable. There are so many people, even if they are really great at what they do, they are just a victim of circumstances. And then if they're not great at what they do, they're usually a victim of their own, downfall. Because you couldn't get something done, or somebody else. You could only keep 3 designers of the 6, so we're gonna go right. There's just circumstances. There's all sorts of things, and so to last for 28 years and to leave on your own terms as opposed to being shuttered away is absolutely a testament to Chris's hard work, his many talents, his imagination, his willingness to take one for the team over and over and over and over and over.
We could have a whole show about him, but one other thing I want to say is that I know that he worked through sort of responding to initiatives that Ajit George started, but he worked to mentor young and up-and-coming designers, including those who did not work at Wizards of the Coast at the time, to help lift up others in the industry, which is also remarkable because if you've worked with him, as you and I have, he's super busy. And so sometimes you really do get a one-line response if I don't have time to read this. But he took time out for those folks that he thought could be lifted up and become better designers through his mentoring, and tried to do things that were difficult. Like, I think confrontation, what's the Candlekeep book?
Candlekeep Mysteries?
Yeah, Candlekeep Mysteries, right? He tried to bring in people who had never written before or had written only a few times and tried to help them and spend time with them. And that's the kind of thing he believed in, which is also remarkable.
And so out goes Chris. We wish you a speedy long rest, and we hope to see your work again somewhere at some point. And in comes, or back comes, Greg Bilsland.
What?
So I didn't even know this, but Teos, tell us about this.
Yeah, well, Dave Rosser caught us right before we started with the news, and I went over to LinkedIn, and sure enough, there it was. Greg Bilsland posted today, "I'm thrilled to share that today I'm returning to Wizards of the Coast as executive producer for Dungeons & Dragons. I started my career at Wizards of the Coast and returned to work on D&D as a homecoming. I'm excited to reconnect with the community and hear your thoughts. You can find me over on Instagram at Greg Bilsland and on the D&D Discord, Bilzlebub, Bilzlebub. Let's roll. And I think that's amazing. He was a
Yeah.
producer on the Dungeons and Dragons team, and I thought during the fourth edition era,
Mhm.
he was someone who had a maturity beyond what work he had done at that time,
Yeah.
uh, and a discipline and a view of how you manage projects that was rare back then. A real
Mhm.
desire to give everybody the right information, put the
Yep.
teams together, motivate them, let them create, but sticking to that timeline and goal and so on. He had that kind of diligence that good
Mhm.
producers and good managers do. So I'm excited to see he's been at I think was he at Bungie, I
Mhm.
believe
Yeah.
is where he was, and he was at at Amazon. Sorry, working. So he's worked at a number of places since leaving the D&D team. So it's great to see him return, and yeah, maybe we can grab him for the show because it's really exciting to have him back on the team.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Going back to the previous one, because I'm like, you're gonna have to hire three people to replace Chris, right? You have to replace his managerial duties. You have to
Yeah,
replace his absolutely wonderful editing and creative design duties, and even layout. Even
yeah,
things like getting a book from one state into the next state.
yeah,
Chris did a lot of work with, I know. So,
yeah.
uh, Greg coming back makes
Fills
me
those
feel
holes.
better
Yeah,
about
yeah,
things going on there, that one force leaves and another force who we've worked with. And as you say, when things were going haywire with projects, I would just, Greg, could you please tell me
yeah.
what's going on? And he either knew or he didn't know, but he found out. And it's that sort of managerial leadership that
Yeah.
big projects like they do at Wizards of the Coast needs.
And another example of a person on the D&D team that just cares deeply, right? Just
Yep.
at the end, their number one priority is the game doing well, people doing well, right? And serving that purpose. So that's great. Look forward to it.
Mhm. From the good news of Greg's return to the bad news of tariffs. Uh, as the tariffs kicked in last week, tabletop leaders found themselves pondering, what is this going to mean? And many of them reached out via social media or their own websites to give a rundown. So just to be clear, tariffs have been now impacting trade between the U.S. and countries like the European Union, with a 20% increase in tariffs. Canada is also on the table there, and of course, China with additional 34% tariffs, totaling now 54% increase in tariffs. We don't know really what the full impact is going to be, either in role-playing games, tabletop games, or anything
Yeah.
at this point, as we wait for the fallout to really hit, other than the stock market tanking about 20%. Uh, so what do game companies say about this? Teos,
Yeah.
I was going to go into tariffs in
Well,
general.
I'll just add two
Yeah.
little bits that I think are important to understand, right? So that these tariffs are on the cost of goods sold. So let's say that I've got a book and it costs $40, right? Or $60. Let's say it
Mhm.
costs $50. Easy numbers to work with. That is not the cost of what a company in China,
Mhm.
what that represents when it goes through the border, right? That is the sticker price, but the actual cost to create it that I paid for if I'm the owner of the book, but I ordered it from China, it might be $10 a book, right? So the tariff is on that $10. Whatever the cost was, whatever I got really charged as an input, right, to my business, that's what it is, right? If you think of like the gear that's going to go in the machine, whatever you paid for that gear, not the cost of the machine. So it is on that
Mhm.
cost of goods sold, which lowers it a bit. A lot of the examples that people will use will be like, oh, it's a $50 book, so then it's a X% increase. It's not quite that way. It's still super significant, right? I mean, we all know that this industry of role playing games, it's a shoestring affair, and it's
Mhm.
very perilous even for the best of companies. So any increase is brutal. And I can say, having been only involved in minor ways around choosing where to print a book, the U.S.,
Mhm.
Canada, China, it's really difficult not to go with China. you lose
Mhm.
thousands, right? When we did Forge of Foes in Canada, we just paid for that, right? Like we just
Yeah.
subtracted money from our profit to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And Canada, I think from what I'm reading, did not increase in tariffs this time, though it had tariffs previously. And so each country is slightly different, and thus the impacts are difficult. But one cannot simply switch to another. For board games in particular, which are not exempt from the tariffs, currently books are exempt,
Mhm.
but other materials are not. But a board game is a great example where when you think of the wooden pieces that you're going to move around, the board made of cardboard and printed on and all of that, the plastic cards, the whatevers, all of that, you can find companies in the US that will do some of those components, but finding someone who can do the whole board game in a quick time frame at a low cost is exceedingly difficult. It's not impossible, but it's exceedingly difficult. And so
Yeah.
literally there's no answer as to what our industry will do. And that's where these companies then shared some different perspectives on things.
Yeah, because we had Steve Jackson Games writing about the challenges, talking about a three something manufactured in China for $3 will probably now cost $4.62 before it's shipped across the ocean, and you
Right.
add freight, warehouse fulfillment, distribution. A $25 game quickly becomes a $40 game, and that's not just an upcharge of okay, let's make a profit on this. This is survival.
Yeah.
And we had the same message. Well, actually, they said, well, why not manufacture in the US? And it's like you say, you can get certain things done,
Mm-hmm.
but to put the whole game together, if you print the dice in the US, but do the plastic, then you have to ship everything to the same place, which is an
Assemble it all.
additional cost
Yeah.
to put together. It's just completely, it can't be done, or it could be done at like 10 times the cost. And we got the same message recently from Samantha Webb of Modifius Games, who said they reached out a while ago, or a US company reached out to them to say, hey, print here, think of all the shipping you'll save. And it was double. It was double the cost of getting the same stuff done in China. So even with the tariff, it still makes sense to do it in China
But you just
because
lost a ton of money.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you're still losing a bunch of money. So there's
Yeah.
just there's no thought.
It's
And
really tough. Mm.
a tariff is a tool that a country can use, and if it's used very judiciously, if it is used with the keenest of eye toward all the moving parts, there is a chance that maybe it can stimulate the growth of industry in your country. If it is done with such a keen intelligence about where the numbers are, this is like brain surgery with a sledgehammer. It is
Yeah.
what we're seeing right now. There's
Yeah.
no thought in those very intricate details. It's just let's throw this huge number out there without regard for industry, without regard for anything
Yeah.
that would actually make it a tool worth using.
And even though, this is probably our first mention of tariffs on the show, but we've been watching this for quite some time. And in fact, Drive Through RPG raised all of their prices for print on demand, or many of their prices for print on demand several
Mhm.
weeks ago, before even any tariffs, right? Just sort of pre-reacting to it. And that's part of the problem, is even though books are technically exempt from this,
Mhm.
you could see prices go up across the board because of everything else that's happening and impacting. And it just could really result in a massive increase to the price of gaming on what, as we say over and over again, is such a narrow band of revenue that you have to work with. And an example of that was this store, Ludington, that shared
Mhm.
on Bluesky. They have an annual revenue of 270,000. Their inventory costs 150,000. That's their yearly inventory cost. So this leaves 120,000 to cover all of their costs, right? Rent,
Mhm.
salaries, utilities, and in theory, having some profit there. The amount of inventory from China out of that 150 is 100K. So they were saying our new tariffs could make that around 140, reducing our remaining revenue to 80 rather than 120 to cover all those non-inventory costs. Well, 80 is what you'd like your salary to be. if you were just one person, but you're not. You're multiple people working in this store. You've got all these costs you still have to cover, like rent and so on. They're saying the 40K of additional cost is more than their mortgage. So there's no way they can just eat it. So do you add it to each product coming from China or whatever the country is? Do you spread it across all products? Plus, do those products themselves end up costing more? There's just no easy answer, and it threatens the entire business.
So we will keep an eye on that and keep our ears to the socials and to blogs to see how else this will affect books. Maybe at some point, if it affects board games even more than we thought or less, we'll keep an eye on that. Some interesting news coming out of GAMA. The GAMA communication manager communicated to everyone via ICV2 that GAMA is broken.
Yeah.
That the marketing communication manager, Amy Lau, posted on LinkedIn that she had resigned her position. She had just joined in October. GAMA, of course, is the trade organization for the hobby industry, which runs Origin Game Fair as well as another convention for game manufacturers and retailers earlier in the year. And so what did Amy say about the here? But here's the honest truth. This is her quote. GAMA is deeply siloed and in many ways broken, with toxic leadership, rampant gatekeeping, insecurity masquerading as control, and disrespect toward other staff and members. And
yeah,
based on information I've heard from people that have to work with GAMA or through GAMA, this is probably an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a troubled organization, something that long ago, was trying to thwart Gary Gygax even right back in the day, and just
right
organizing itself against TSR and other causes. And it's always had this great potential to do good, right? For example, with these tariffs. But it seems like a place that's often stumbling over itself. And yeah, it's had some brief moments when it felt like it aligned clearly under strong leadership, but it has not seemed that way most of the time that I've dealt with it, unfortunately, from what I hear.
Yeah, I have not seen any reply from GAMA leadership on this, but if we get any response, we will report on that as well.
Yeah, I saw a minor note that was very just, we thank her for her service, and GAMA's committed to this, that, and the other kind of statement. It was very, very vanilla.
Yep. And we have Monte Cook talking about narrative versus math. Now, I think Graham Ward brought this up a couple of weeks ago on the show, right?
He did, which was so it was fun to see Monte Cook dig into this because we've just been talking about this kind of thing.
Yeah. So what does Monte have to say?
So in his blog, Monte kind of clearly steals what Graham was talking about and builds on it. No, I'm absolutely kidding. But he starts with how giving a magic item with like a +1, right, or a feature, a +1 bonus to attack or whatever, is a common way that games will sort of reward the character and the player behind it, because a small math bonus like that shows competency. It's desired by players, but it may not work well in the fiction. And he kind of asks, is Aragorn the same person, the same as any other person out there, right? Any commoner, but just has more +1s? Is that what makes Aragorn different in Lord of the Rings? And it can create rules bloat and math issues as well, right? If you have tons and tons of pluses that you're tracking, and I'm looking at 3rd edition here, it can just seem so overwhelming. Plus, your players can start gathering these all up. And suddenly, if you know the math of 3rd edition, you're making checks that exceed 50. And yeah, you can grapple pit fiends, all that sort of thing that if you played 3rd edition, you got to see. And then the other option, if you move away from this kind of mathematical bonus, is more of a narrative bonus. The archer can loose arrows from horseback, says Monte. The lock-picking character can pick a lock much faster than normal. The starship pilot can coax speed beyond the ship's limits using a clever maneuver. The problem is that such advantages are bespoke. A designer needs to create different advantages for different types of actions. So, that can slow down the game. It provides more flavor, but you need to think about how to do that. And he adds, want a computer interface that adds +1 to hacking attempts, or one that disguises your online identity so you always appear to be the observer's own mother? What do you think, Shawn?
I think that is so great, except that, as you say, and I agree with you completely, coming up in the notes here, that there's math behind all of it.
Yeah.
And so you can say, you can try to create a narrative heavy game or a completely narrative game that uses no math, but games use math. And even games that don't look like they use a lot of math or use math at all really do use some sort of quantitative uh, structure,
Right.
even though you are trying to create a qualitative bonus.
Yeah, like I like that example of would you rather have +1 to your hacking or disguise your online identity so that you can look like someone's mother? Um, there is something behind this, right? At the end of it is the fact that you would normally make a check, right? You would be in
Mhm.
some situation in most games where you'd say, like, I want to look like their mother. So do you get a +1 to the roll, or do you just get to do it? And just getting to do it, like saying, well, you can always disguise your online identity, may not be desirable, right? That may hand wave the check, or maybe it's
Mhm.
interpretive. Like one DM will say, well, you just do it. And another one will say, I guess I'll give you advantage on your check. Or,
Right.
it's hard to say. So maybe you lose predictability, or maybe you've hand waved some part of the adventure that was seen as a big deal for the game master because of this feature you have. All that can be a problem because there is math, as you said, underlying that game and balance and so on.
Yeah. And so, if you ask me in Fate, would you rather have the +1 or the, I guess you would call it a stunt in Fate
Mm-hmm.
of, once per session, you can disguise your identity while you are doing this online hack. I would say give me the +1 every time, because the ability to disguise is great, but if I don't make the check in the first place, it doesn't matter if I'm disguised or not. So
Mhm.
that +1 becomes hugely important in Fate or in a Powered by the
Right.
Apocalypse game, as
Yeah.
opposed to D&D where the 1 to 20 roll. And we are going to talk about all of this in our main segment coming up, because
Yeah.
it dovetails beautifully with this
Yeah.
sort of thing.
And you can see that in third edition, right? Giving somebody a +1 is way less of an issue when the tracking DC might be a 20 or whatever. And I think
Right.
my character in third edition had like a +40 to tracking I could get or something like that, right? So the game could exist with that. But if you're looking at Gumshoe, where you roll a D6, or Savage Worlds, where your target number is a 4, a +1 is a big deal there, right? A -2, a +2, like those are enormous swings to things. And so it really matters what your game is. But similarly, that non-mathematical thing can be just as impactful. And I'm reminded of the Star Wars Saga Edition, which has a really cool idea of, hey, there's a damage track, but there's also this
Mhm.
kind of condition track that as you go up it, if you inflict this, it gets worse. And folks who don't know it, you could think of like exhaustion in 5e. It's sort of something like that. And
Mhm.
it could often work fine and create this kind of flavorful thing of how, like, they didn't shoot you, but they sort of slowed you and you're dealing with it. But certain features granted ways to jump up that condition track. And what could happen is someone could build a situation where you could literally just shoot a starship once and it was disabled.
Yep.
Because you did so many extra little things that you tacked on to just
Mhm.
disable it. And so it just could literally wreck the game, right? Just all within the
Right.
game's understood parameters. But because it was trying to be in this sort of more narrative flavor, it still at the end of the day needs that balance.
Right. And complexity has a lot to do with it as well, as you say there, Teos. If you make a check and you just, okay, I've damaged the ship, that's one thing in a very simple system. In a complex system where you've got all of these things that you're bringing into the character or into the situation, you can really mess with the way the system is supposed to work.
Yeah.
And for a game like Fate, that's actually written into the game,
Mm.
right? As you create aspects, as you get boosts, and then are free to add the +2 over and over again from these different things that people are doing for you, or you are using fate points to tap. That is meant to happen, but there are times when it's not meant to happen, but it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, and that was our news and commentary section.